In today's episode of Frame Breakers, I talked to MarketingMax. He's the founder of a newsletter called Growth Daily that has over 60,000 subscribers. And before that, he built and sold a 7-figure marketing agency and recently just sold another newsletter that had over 10,000 subscribers. In this episode, we talk about an amazing Google Ads hack that Max used to book nearly $1 million in revenue with just $7,000 of ad spend. We also talk about how you should evaluate a marketing agency from someone that used to run an agency and has a bunch of friends and colleagues in the agency space. And we also cover how B2B companies should be using newsletters more effectively. If you get just a little bit of value from this podcast, the best thing you can do is pay it forward by sending it to someone who you think might also find it valuable, or just going into Spotify or Apple and giving us a good rating. Thanks for showing up, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Wonderful. Well, welcome to the show, Max. We have today Max, known as MarketingMax online. He's the founder of Growth Daily, a newsletter with over 60,000 subscribers, and he's the founder of Hell's Creative, a digital agency that he built and sold back in 2022. He's got another project that's still in stealth mode that he's working on that will be more publicly known here in the coming week. But Max, how are you doing?
I'm good, dude. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm excited to talk to you. So let's just dive straight into your background. So you spent a little bit of time in finance before getting into the marketing world. Why did you leave the finance?
Have you ever worn a suit and tie? It's awful. It's not comfortable, especially when it's 90 degrees in the summer and you're walking around Wall Street and you're 23 years old, no matter how much money they pay you, working 80 hours a week and wearing a suit and tie and leaving the office at 2 a.m. multiple times a week is not fun. The real answer, though, is I always had entrepreneurial passions. I always had entrepreneurial dreams. I went to college and majored in entrepreneurship, and I started my first company when I was 16 years old. So I always knew I wanted to start something on my own. I ended up in finance working on Wall Street after college because I interned at a few different venture capital and private equity funds and thought that the fastest way for me to get rich at a young age was actually not to start a startup, but to be an investment banker and to help early stage companies or mid stage companies raise capital. So I got a job at an investment bank. They asked me to run their tech team. I was building pitch decks and financial models, projections for early stage tech companies, helping them raise capital. I really didn't love the hours. Like I said, I didn't like the culture. But then after about 6 months or so, they made me take the Series 7 exam, which is the exam that you need to take to be able to sell licensed securities. And although I really wasn't selling like stocks or licensed securities, they said because I work in this particular organization, I'm an investment banker, I have to, and I was an awful test taker, and I bombed the Series 7 exam. 2 weeks later, when I was debating if I was going to take it again or get a job at a different company or start my own investment bank, because I don't think you need to be a licensed Series 7 broker to do a lot of the work that we were doing. One of my clients looked at me in the face and said, I want you to run my Facebook ads. And at the time, I had no experience really running Facebook ads, but I was bored. I just bombed the Series 7 exam, and she gave me $2,000 in ad spend. I turned her $2,000 into ad spend into $20,000 in revenue in 2 weeks, like booked revenue in the door. And I was like, this is way more fun than investment banking and spending 6 to 9 months to help someone raise $10 million and then waiting 10 years to see if it works out. I can make a direct impact in entrepreneurs' lives and businesses and people's lives, because then they could take that money and then go reinvest it back into hiring more people and everything else. And then that's how I became MarketingMax.
Unpack that for a second there. So why did she trust you to run Facebook ads for her, and what was she selling that you helped her sell more?
Yeah, she had a wellness studio in Manhattan. She was selling massages, Reiki treatments, crystal light bed therapy, kind of some people might call it woo-woo, but some wellness, alternative wellness products and services. She said to me after we were meeting and pitching investors, she said, I put together an amazing case study deck, or not case study deck, sorry. She said, I put together an amazing investor deck with case studies of her business, but she said, if I can help her raise $5 million for her Series A round from investors, why can't I help her raise $50 at a time from customers? She just saw that I put together a really good story in the deck and knew how to present the story well and articulate the value propositions to the investors. And she said, word for word, every agency I've hired sucked. And I was like, how many Facebook ad agencies have you hired? Because I hadn't really heard of like smaller time Facebook ad agencies for smaller businesses. This was like late 2016. So it wasn't nearly as popular as it is today. And I said, man, that's a pretty wild opportunity. If you've hired 3 or 4 different agencies and they've all sucked, you think I'm good at it. So I owe pretty much the whole MarketingMax career to Alexandra. But yeah, that's why she chose me and trusted me. And the $2,000 budget back then was a lot, because CPMs were a fraction what they are today. So I was able to do a lot more with her $2,000 than I would be able to do today.
So we got the quick genesis story on Hell's Creative. How did you go about finding the rest of your clients? How did you build your book from there? I think that's something that's always on the top of mind for agency owners.
Yeah, at the time, one of the reasons I was able to get the job running the tech team for this very small investment bank was I was going to weekly startup meetups and events in the city. So I had a pretty large network at the time, and I actually had a really small blog on Medium, if you remember medium.com, called Max's Startup Radar, where every week I'd profile a different startup. And from there, I was able to build a very small following on Twitter. I think I had like 1,000 followers on Twitter before I changed the name to MarketingMax. And I just had an audience of people that I would at meetups, I would go to events with. I was in a couple like social clubs in New York City. And so I just started to talk to a few people saying, hey, have you ever thought about Facebook ads for your business, or who runs your Facebook ads now? I would get access to their account, do an audit, sometimes take over ads or run a new campaign alongside their existing agency, or oftentimes it was just the entrepreneur doing it themselves. And that very first client that I had from the investment bank paid me $250 a month. I didn't know what to charge, and I was making good money from the investment bank. So I went to all the other people and I was like, yeah, $250 a month. I'll just manage everything for you. And a couple months later, I was like, you know what, $250 a month, like I want this to replace my investment banking salary. So I upped a good handful of them to like $1,000 or $1,500 a month, had enough to at least cover my rent, and I had some savings, and quit my job and left the investment banking world with maybe 6 or so clients that I was running ads for. I was still creating pitch decks and doing some investment banking capital raise style services for some companies, but oftentimes I would pitch it as a hybrid service where you could go pay this investment bank a monthly retainer, or you could pay them 10% of whatever your $5 million raise is, or you could pay me $1,200 a month. I'll make the pitch deck for you. I'll create your financial projections for you, since I've been trained how to do that and been doing that for years. And I'll run Facebook ads for you so you can show investors that you have a profitable funnel. And that was just kind of a winning strategy and offer, as Hormozi would say, to go to the market for, or go to the market with pretty early on. And then from there, I just struggled to get clients for like a year and a half until I realized my first growth hack of running Google ads to get clients for my agency. But yeah, it's a struggle for every agency owner when you're first starting out. It's all just word of mouth referral. Back then, I guess I tapped into some sort of an offer before Hormozi came out with $100 million offer. But yeah, that's the story.
Let's talk about this growth hack. What happened? How did it work?
Yeah, I was in the office late one night. At that point, it was me, the co-founder of the agency. So I guess it's a pretty important part that we've skipped over. I asked one of my college buddies who was working at a very big ad agency called DDB, stands for Doyle, Dane, and Bernbach, one of the old school like Mad Men era agencies. He was running media buying for healthcare companies at DDB. And I asked him to come join the agency that I was starting. And I said, we'll be 50-50 partners. You run the media buying using the strategy that I kind of set for this one small client, my very first client that I got from the investment bank. And then I'll bring in business because I have all these contacts through all these startup meetups I was going to. So yeah, fast forward a year and a half, the first growth hack to get clients, it was me, my co-founder, maybe one full-time employee at the time. And we were really struggling to get clients. I think we lost 3 clients in the matter of like 2 days or even 24 hours. And I was like, man, there's no predictable way to get revenue as an agency. There's nothing predictable.
Right.
And I went into one of the conference rooms in our co-working space in Midtown, and I said to myself, all right, if I was my own client, what would I tell myself? What would the strategy be? And I made a list of all of the different like growth hacks or like campaign styles or strategies that were working best for most of our clients. And I realized that one of the best strategies was this strategy on Google Ads called Conquesting, which essentially means that you bid on your competitor's brand name. And I thought, okay, well, bidding on the term best marketing agency or best Facebook ad agency is like $9 cost per click. I see there's this agency out of LA running a bunch of Facebook ads. And I know as a marketer, having only done this, a year or a year and a half, I know that if someone spends a bunch of money on Facebook ads, people are probably going and Googling the brand name because they don't want to click on the Facebook ad.
Right.
So I pulled up SEMrush, the tool that shows you how many searches a particular search or keyword is getting every month. And I noticed that 3,000 people were Googling Hawk Media every month and no one was bidding on their keyword. So I literally ran out of the conference room in the co-working space. I went to my laptop, I opened up Google Ads, I created a brand new ad account for my agency, and I got an ad live, literally just bidding on the term Hawk Media. And my ad said, Hawk Media equals expensive, Hell's Creative equals 4x ROI, because we were averaging a 4x return on investment for all of our clients across everything. And I swear within, call it 24 hours, we had 6 qualified leads, like boom, just like that. And I think I was only spending like $50 a day. So it was like $1,500. I immediately doubled the ad spend. We were getting like 20 to 30 leads every single week for a good like 3 months. It was like absolutely wild. I had no idea how to sell. I had no idea how to book calls at the end of a call. I had no idea how to pitch. And so my close rate wasn't all that great, but we more than doubled our revenue within about 2 months off of that Google Ads hack. And then a bunch of agencies started to catch on, and the cost per click went from about $1.50 to $3, and then $4, and then $5. And now if you want to bid on Hawk Media, it's like $9. But back then, that's how we were able to go from me and my co-founder and 1 employee to at least 3 full-time employees, more than double our revenue within 60 days. It's pretty crazy.
Do you think you can still run that play today?
Yeah, sorry, just drinking some water. Yeah, you can absolutely run that play today. It's just way more expensive. So you have to have an even better landing page, and your cost to acquire a customer is going to be way more expensive. But that conquesting strategy has worked well for literally dozens of brands that I've worked with, either through the agency or one-on-one as a client of just MarketingMax. So
And
I'm a huge fan of conquesting.
is it still that strategy, particularly of like find out basically people that are running ads someplace, but they're not getting any competition or running ads against their own brand on Google, and that's where you can capture the value?
I think the value is just finding keywords that are low volume because they're going to be low expensive. But everyone says, oh, if they're low volume, that means that there's not a lot of people. Well, it doesn't matter if it's low volume so long as it's hyper relevant. So this is something my co-founder taught me. We look for low volume but hyper relevant keywords, not relevant keywords, hyper relevant. So, for Hell's Creative, my agency, who charged at the time like $3,000 a month to manage your Facebook and Google ads, for us to go bid on Ogilvy would make no sense.
Right.
Like Ogilvy's working with Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola is not going to work with us. But what is hyper relevant is bidding on Hawk Media, because they charged the same that we charged, and they worked with almost the same level of clientele that we worked with.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even say almost, I would say the exact same level of clientele. And because our name started with an H and theirs started with an H, a lot of people would get on the website, immediately click contact us, book a call with us, and then get on the phone thinking it was Hawk Media. They're like, hey, tell me about Hawk Media. I'm like, no, this is Hell's Creative. And then I would share my screen on the Zoom and I would walk them through how they clicked on, this ad. And they're like, wow, that's really clever. You guys really understand marketing. I want to hire you. And yeah, it was a very interesting, funny time. I just wish I knew more about sales, and I wish I had a better sales methodology and really understood the tactics of how to close better back then, because my agency would have sold for significantly more. But yeah.
That's an awesome story. And I think it's good to know too that it's still effective today, because marketing strategies are changing so fast that some stuff that works 2 months ago might not even work today, right? Or may become much more expensive. Going back to the agency itself. So, you first just you, then you brought on your friend and co-founder, and then you had one other full-time employee. How was the rest as you guys got to your peak? How were you guys structured?
Yeah, when I sold the agency in October of 2021, we had 15 or so full-time employees, and we broke them out into pods. So our whole unique angle or offer or secret sauce was all about managing your media buying, managing your ad campaigns for the same cost or I shouldn't say as the same cost. Let me back that up. Our whole thing was managing your ads and doing your creative for one flat monthly fee. So I had a full-time team of video editors, photo editors on staff, and then I also had a team of media buyers on staff. And once we had enough team members, we essentially paired up 2 creatives with 1 media buyer. They were a pod. And so that pod could manage up to 10 clients at once. And so that's how we scale. We tried a million different things. Like, I know the founder of Mute 6, I've heard him on a few podcasts before. And he was like, we scaled from 1 employee to hundreds of employees in 5 or 6 years, and we tried a million different things. We tried pods. We tried assigning one client to one media buyer and then rotating the creatives every month. They tried 40 million different. We found that the pods worked really well because we would create pods that had domain expertise. So we had like a luxury pod where, if you were a luxury brand selling anything from, like, we had a client that was doing bondage lingerie, luxury bondage lingerie, to like just, t-shirts, like luxury, like $200, really nice woven t-shirts, right? They were in the same pod. We had like a fun e-commerce brand pod that was like children's swimwear and eyelashes that had like a fun brand. And so it allowed the creatives to use a lot of the things that were working well from one client in a similar vertical, apply those same kind of styles or graphics or positions to the other client. And it worked out really well in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome. And was this a mixture of onshore and offshore talent?
It was mostly offshore. We had 1, 2, 3, we had 4, including me, 5. We had 5 in the States and then 10 overseas. Full time though, working on pretty much Eastern time zone. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of hiring overseas, and that's something I've gotten really, really, really good at, is how to find and manage and train talent that is overseas.
Yeah, obviously that's our business, right? What we do at RGP, and I think, if people put in the time to find the right talent, they can find some really great talent overseas. And I think, I'm curious if you agree with this. I'm guessing yes. It's probably a leading question of sorts, but I think more teams, especially agency businesses or businesses that might be only, say, like 10 to 30 employees, are going to be built around a handful of strategic folks that are very core to the business. And then they're going to build out a flexible workforce that, whether they're based onshore, nearshore, offshore, wherever, they're going to find ways to build a more flexible workforce to scale up and down with their client demand as needed.
Yeah, I think it's very role dependent. So some roles are just better for onshore inside an agency, from what I found. Like, it's really hard to find someone overseas who can sell agency services, who can get on the phone and close and sell agency services. Not a knock for anyone in any nation or anything. It's just I've never found someone who comes to an interview well prepared, ready to close and show their sales skills and their ability to show confidence to the U.S. market. Not saying that they don't exist, just saying I've found that to be something that's really hard to find. Versus media buyers overseas that have experience managing $500,000 a month campaigns are a dime a dozen. You can find them literally everywhere. And if they speak English well enough, I don't even know if I'm speaking English well enough, but if they speak English well enough, then they could be an amazing hire that costs the agency, anywhere between $1,000 to $2,500 a month, versus that same person with that same level of experience stateside could be $100,000 or $200,000 a year. So you're literally saving like 80 plus K a year. Those people are a dime a dozen to find, versus the salespeople. So that's just an example. I found it to be very role dependent. And I think I've also learned to challenge some of the premonitions that I had about what roles might be good for overseas and not. Like, the majority of our creative team was actually overseas. In fact, I'd say our entire creative team was overseas, except for one person in the States. The one person in the States managed the entire creative team, but everyone else was good enough to manage the team. And when my agency was acquired, that person left. And now, even to this day, 2 years later, one of the overseas creative team members is running the entire creative team. And we're talking about creating Facebook ads and writing Google ads copy for brands that will only ever advertise in the US. Like, you have to have a good understanding of US culture sometimes to figure out, contextually relevant copy and everything else. But I find people who are really tuned in to the US culture and US advertising and US marketing, and they use VPNs to scroll TikTok in the US. And it's pretty amazing what you can find overseas. So yeah, I could talk about this forever. I could do a whole podcast on my version of what you guys do. Yeah. Not that I'm a competitor of, but just like how I do it. But yeah. I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing to when you see that, when the people where it clicks and they understand American culture, right? It makes things so much smoother. And I actually was talking to a guy the other day, and he's a fresh college grad. His English was amazing. He's based in Pakistan. We were asking about how he got so good at English. And he said, when I was in 2009, I begged my dad to buy me an Xbox, and I started playing Call of Duty every day. And so I'm interacting with a bunch of other like teenagers and college students from the US. And so I picked up on exactly how they communicated, and I had to communicate the same way. And that's how he eliminated a bunch of his accent and like understands a bunch of idiosyncrasies of like
Wow.
modern day English.
I've never heard the video game story, but pretty much every single person I've hired overseas is either a huge show or a huge fan of the show Friends.
Yes.
That's a tongue twister. Fan of the show Friends.
Yep.
And so everyone always bonds over the inside jokes of Friends or Taylor Swift.
Yep.
And so sometimes like we'll send them like Taylor Swift shirts, or like we have an Instagram group chat with everyone. And so we'll send like Taylor Swift memes or like inside jokes about Taylor Swift. And it just helps culture. Like it's absolutely amazing. This stuff was way harder to do. And by this stuff, I mean hiring overseas talent and creating even a company culture with it, 5 years ago, let alone 10, 20 years ago. Now I think it's realistic to have an entire agency built off of overseas team members with a good, strong company culture, right? Like that's so hard to nail. And I think a lot of agency owners to do it for the first time, they just put everyone in a Slack group and they have a work, chat all day long. They just talk about work all day long and that's it. We have chats in our Slack. We had this at the agency and now I employ, I don't like the word employee. I don't like the word employee or employ, but now we have a few overseas full-time team members on staff at my current business, my newsletter business. And we have chats that say music and chats that say food, like the name of it's music.
Yep.
And if they're listening to something, even if it's an Indian track and they live in India, like I want to hear it. That's interesting. That could be cool, right? Or if it's food, like everyone cooks dinner every night, almost every night. I don't know anyone that like eats out every single night.
Right.
So people are showing off what they make in India, in Pakistan, in Australia, in Mexico, obviously in the States. And so it's a way to create company culture and find things that are similar, whether it's Xbox, Taylor Swift,
Right.
food, whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I think that part of creating a team environment, because a lot of these folks aren't used to working in teams and they're used to working siloed, and that is just like one secret to building sustainability with these folks is make them feel like they're part of the team and don't treat them like they're just a contractor or they're just a freelancer, and that relationship will last a lot longer.
Couldn't agree more.
Let me ask you about evaluating agencies, right? Like I think there's a lot of, now that you're kind of on the other side, I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts on how companies should evaluate marketing agencies they're considering.
Man, I could write a whole book on this, and I probably should because there's so many shitty agencies out there. I think if you're looking to hire an agency, the first thing you want to do is ask for case studies, and you want to ask for proof that those case studies exist. And what I mean by proof is if someone says they've generated a 4x return on investment for this particular client, they're already giving the name of the client. And so they should be able to send you at the very least screenshots, but ideally screen share with you and walk you through the ROI of the Facebook ad account live inside the Facebook ad account. So backing up those case studies, I think is the most important thing. I would never in a million years ask to speak to a client because they're going to put you on the phone with their absolute best client. And every agency has, if you have 20 clients, 5 are going to be super, super, super happy. 10 are going to be in the middle and 5 are going to be absolutely hating you at all times. That's just running a service business in general. If you're a plumber, it's the same thing. You can't make everyone happy. People have unrealistic expectations. It's just wild across the board. But I think what you want to look for is case studies and backing up those case studies, number one. And then number two is communication. You want to look at how quickly they respond to your emails. You want to look at, how directly are they answering your questions? Because communication is really all you can ask for from an agency at the end of the day. Strategies change, brands change, what works and what doesn't work changes. Team members in the agency are going to come and go. At the end of the day, do they communicate quickly? Are they honest? Are they proactive in thinking one step ahead instead of always on their back foot? And that's what I found to be the biggest problem with agencies outside of the lying on the case study thing. The biggest problem I found is, you onboard too many clients at once. You don't staff up quickly enough. So you're always on your back foot. You're always responding to an email or coming up with a campaign idea when the client isn't happy, instead of being like, things are great. How can we take this even further? So I think looking at how fast they communicate in the sales process and using, verified agency sites like Clutch or Yelp or anything to read those case studies of the bad situation, I think are really important.
Yeah, I think that the red flags too you're talking about, similar to any service business, right, is like their attention to detail and how much they care about the service aspect of it and making sure that you're aware, right? Are they being proactive with their email communication? Are they adhering to their own deadlines? And if they're not, are they giving you a heads up, right? Small things like that usually send a very strong signal. So I think a lot of what you said makes a ton of sense. So fast forward a couple of years, right? The agency is going pretty well, but you end up deciding to sell.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason, number one, was I always knew I wanted to sell the agency. When I started the agency, I was like, I'm going to grow it to 500 employees and sell it for $100 million. And that vision and dream kind of very quickly went away when I realized just how challenging it is to get clients, keep clients, really scale a people services business. It's way harder to scale an agency than it is to scale a media business, or it is to scale a software product. But once I got to a point where I can comfortably sell for a number that I thought was worth the 5 years of stress and energy and headaches I put into it, I kind of saw that as an opportunity to get out. It was also the same time as iOS 14 was kind of wreaking havoc on the Facebook ad landscape. It was significantly harder to close clients because now there were 40 million different agencies and everyone read Alex Hormozy's book, and everyone was coming up with these crazy offers. I'll guarantee X in 3 months, or your money back, or this or that. And it felt very much like a bottom of the barrel race to zero.
Yeah.
And it was just not a business that I wanted to get into, or I should say not a business that I, really saw a future in. I wanted to do higher leverage things, and took the opportunity to cash in my chips right before, I would say, like the decline of agency multiples. Because once iOS 14 hit, agencies started getting sold for, 1x, 1.5x profit. And, unless you're doing millions and millions and millions of dollars a year in profit, even $1 million a year plus in profit. So yeah, those are the two main reasons. I would say one, I was just tired of the agency grind and thought I had a good enough position to sell it for a number I thought was fair and worth my time and energy and stress putting into it. And / the race to the bottom of Facebook ads getting significantly harder to justify an ROI for.
Yeah, I think that makes sense from a timing perspective. Can you walk us through, just, you don't have to go through every painstaking detail, but walk us through the process kind of step by step of, like I'm not sure if you shopped it around to figure it out, or what kind of like just the main milestones in selling it and any kind of relevant stories along the way.
Yeah, so I have a very different story than most people do. I think a lot of agency owners, they shop it around. The moment I was interested in selling and really considering it, I was just happening to have a conversation with one of my friends who works in finance. I was telling him I was thinking about selling it with no goal or expectations of what would happen. But he said, I actually have a friend that's buying agencies and rolling them up. I had a conversation with the guy, believed in his vision, and sold my company to him 4 months later. I didn't really speak to any other people or any other potential buyers. I spoke to an investment banker, actually, who specializes in agency acquisitions. And I just wanted to confirm that my number was not on the low end, because I didn't want to go through 6 months of due diligence and all sorts of crap and then take my eye off the ball. And next thing you know, my agency has half the clients it does because I was focused on selling it. This guy also from day one said I didn't need to stick around for more than 6 months. And even in those 6 months, I didn't have to give more than 10 hours a week. He had a team already in place to step in and take over my position. And he had a way to generate a bunch of leads. So I was like, man, I don't need to stick around. Everyone else I was even remotely kind of having conversations with about their experience, they were like, yeah, I had to commit to 2 years. I had to commit to 3 years. I had 10 hours a week for 6 months, got my money, got out.
Yeah. That's about as sweet of an earn-out deal that I've heard.
Not as many as you might think. I had a number in my head, and so long as I had that number and that 6 month thing didn't change, I was pretty happy to go through it. There were some semantics in the process that were stressful. The particular buyer that I worked with was really, really, really slow in responding. And that was kind of annoying because I really had faith in them and believed that it would happen, but I tend to move really, really, really fast, and they were slow, and they were just a bigger organization. So that was frustrating. But yeah, beyond that, I sold the business the day the wire hit. I went out for an epic steak dinner with my fiance at the time, my now wife, got hammered, and woke up the next day at like 11 p.m. and was just happy to have like the monkey off my back, because it was stressful. The last like year running the agency was really stressful. Facebook ads got significantly harder to generate an ROI on. I went from being able to close a bunch of new business because I was saying we averaged a 4x ROI, because we did, and retaining a bunch of business because of that to really averaging like a 1 or a 1.5x, nothing to do with us or my agency or my team or my strategy or the clients we chose. It was just, when we first started, my very first client, going all the way back to the original story of charging someone $250 a month to manage their Facebook ad account. Back then, CPMs were $3 or $4, right? It would cost $3 or $4 to get in front of 1,000 people. When I sold my agency, it was upwards of 20. So that alone, 5-6x more expensive to advertise to the same target audience. Facebook ads just weren't nearly as effective. I'm in the business of helping people. I don't want to run a business just for the sake of making me money. I want to run a business that helps other people. And so to go from, 15 out of my 20 clients generating a positive 4-ish X ROI to 3 or 5 out of 20 generating that just wasn't fun anymore. So I was just happy to have the monkey off my shoulder and be able to go play golf way more without having the stress.
I totally get that. All right, so let's fast forward a bit further, right? You started a newsletter and you put that thing out daily. How does that happen? Because newsletters are not necessarily an easy business, right? There's a low barrier to entry in some ways, but being able to do something daily and grow it is really difficult. So walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to give a little bit of context into how this newsletter business started. So I launched my newsletter April of 20, and I launched it originally as a weekly newsletter. And that's why I think this is important. I launched it as a weekly newsletter, basically repurposing a bunch of tweets that I had written that started off by saying growth hack number and then random number. And then it was just like a growth hack. It was a copywriting template. It was the Google Ads hack that I mentioned from my agency. I had like 20 or 30 of those tweets written. And so the concept was every Sunday I would send out a growth hack that was industry agnostic, that any company of any size in any industry can use to grow their business. And I would give examples. So at the bottom, even to this day, of almost every single send, I put like, here's, if you're an e-commerce agency, what you can do to implement this growth hack. If you're an agency, here's what you can do. And if you're a SaaS business, here's what you can do. So super, super, super practical. But continued to grow my audience on Twitter, got up to a point where I felt comfortable running ads in the newsletter. And almost immediately, I would say within like 45 to 60 days, we were booked out 3 months in advance for ads. Everyone that would run an ad would come back and buy 2 months worth of ads, 3 months worth of ads. And I very quickly realized that this was a super high leverage business that I could scale without having to scale headcount, but I would need to scale either audience size or billboards, right? The newsletter is a billboard business, right? I'm selling billboards on the side of the road. In this case, I'm selling, ads inside a newsletter. And so I need more billboards to sell. And that's when I was like, man, I could spend all the money in the world growing this audience, but at the end of the day, that's not how to make significantly more money by just charging more per ad slot, because I'm also going to run out of potential advertisers who can afford to pay $10,000 for one ad or $50,000 for one ad. So I thought I need to start a daily newsletter. I went onto Spotify. I went back to podcasts interviewing Sam Parr and Alex Lieberman, and I forget the guy's name, the guy that founded Business Insider, from like 2014, 2015, 2016, listening to everything I possibly could and studying the game as much as possible. And it became very clear that really the only way to do a daily newsletter is by doing it around news. And so if every Sunday I would send, one growth hack that was practical that everyone could use, I would need to send a daily newsletter covering marketing news, because there's new stuff happening every single day. I can't fill 300 growth hacks, right? And that's just too much content every single day for that particular type of advice or content. So for the first month or month and a half, I wrote the newsletter every single day. And after a month and a half or so, I hired a writer, a freelance writer to write it. So I don't write it every single day. I hired an amazing writer who's written for Marketing Brew and Business Insider and Forbes and a bunch of other amazing, way more legit publications than us. But yeah, she goes in every single day, writes the newsletter, slacks me the newsletter for tomorrow. I give it a quick read through. She schedules it out, and we're good to go.
What was more stress, writing a newsletter every single day or running the agency?
Running the agency, no questions asked.
It's funny because I've heard people talk about how stressful, like, right, in any content creator, when they feel the pressure to create very regularly, can be really tough. And maybe that's a bad comparison, right, between the newsletter and the agency.
Yeah, it's apples to oranges, because when content creators feel like they need to create content every day, it's a blank canvas, right? When you create a new tweet, or when you hit record on TikTok, every single time you do that, you have to come up with something brand new, even if you have your list of like 6 things you always talk about, right? The moment I would open up a blank newsletter for the next day, first off, it wasn't blank because I had a template that I could follow. So I needed 3 things here, 2 things here, and 1 deep dive here, whatever. And then second off, there's new news every single day in the industry. So it wasn't necessarily me feeling the need to create content every single day and feeling the need to fill a blank canvas every single day. It's really just me making sure that I have a good process to find what news happened. And I just happen to be a really good talker, I think, and an articulate person that explains business and marketing well. So it was easy for me to find news, summarize it, and then articulate my 2 cents on it.
Yeah.
That's just very different, apples to oranges.
Yeah, it's great and inspiring in some ways. I know we're running out of time here, but there's a couple of things I want to get to real quick. First, do you think B2B companies are using newsletters? Because my hunch is generally no. But I'm curious how you might think about B2B newsletters, right? Because you're more direct to consumer, B2C newsletters, and I'm wondering what B2B companies could steal from that to write more effective newsletters that potential customers would actually engage in or want to read.
I think B2B newsletters, from what I've seen, always fall into one of 2 buckets. They either update you on the product or they update you on generic industry news. And if they're updating you on the product, the person has to really love the product and be using it often to care about what new features are being added on one hand. On the other hand, if you're updating people with generic industry news, the only reason they're opening that is because they see your B2B brand's name in, the to line or the subject line or I should not say to line, the from line from insert B2B brand name or in, the subject line or the title of the email. 9 out of 10 times they've read that news snippet or your summary of it somewhere else. So do I think B2B businesses are doing newsletters right? No, I would agree with you. I think the opportunity there is to create something unique and different, but that's really more of a marketing initiative than it is a founder initiative or an entrepreneur initiative or a CEO initiative. And so I think it really comes down to the marketing teams, if it's a large enough organization, really taking the time, could literally just be an hour in a conference room at a co-working space, but just really thinking, how can we provide some type of content that is different that people care about? And it doesn't have to be super in-depth, super valuable, super unique content. It could be behind the scenes of how your new feature is made. It could be your employees' take on some industry changes that are happening every week. It could be a tip or a piece of advice, right? But I think that is the opportunity that every single B2B company misses. And it's not just B2B company, it's every single company. B2C, B2B, B2B, B2C, like any company. I think companies' newsletters is a huge missed opportunity that hopefully some of my content and some other creators in the space's content will help people understand that they're missing a huge opportunity to create something unique.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this podcast, right? Is I am trying to target people that my audience, my target buyers are going to respect, right? Other marketing leaders. And I'm getting unique insights by having these conversations that I can then obviously post the full conversation as a podcast, post short clips, then also turn like the synthesis and insights into a newsletter. So that's the vision. We'll see if it works.
Yeah. I mean, one of the best ideas I've ever heard, and I didn't come up with this, your explanation just reminded me, someone a few weeks ago told me or pitched me, they said, I want to do a newsletter, but I want to do it in the form of a podcast. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, I want to interview my customers and ask them the same 4 or 5 questions every single week. That way I don't have to get on the phone with them. They don't have to get on the phone with me. It saves everyone time. I can edit it, but every single week I can do a different Q&A or different profile of my customers. And if I can extract value from them, and to your point, unique insights like you would on a podcast, like you're doing on this podcast, you could just do that in written form. Some people like to consume content visually and they love binge watching stuff. Some people like to read books and consume content via text, right? So there's no shortage of ideas or opportunities to bring value, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a newsletter, written form, whatever. But I think everyone's missing the boat, and all it takes is 1 hour in a conference room, in a co-working space, to whiteboard out how you can bring value to your audience that is different in one little tweak or one little way than all the other content that's out there in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a big opportunity for a lot of folks. All right, running out of time, but there are a couple of things I really got to get to. First, what's the best marketing money you've spent this year,
The best marketing money I've spent.
or you've seen spent?
Ooh, probably I could go one of two ways with this. I'm gonna say, and I promise you this is not a cop out, but I'm gonna explain why. Newsletter ads in other newsletters. I don't just say that because I run a business and want to promote people sponsoring my newsletter. I say that because the quality of the audience, if it's a small enough newsletter, is way more than the value that newsletter is charging. So I should caveat that by saying not just newsletter ads, but newsletter ads in newsletters that have below 20,000 subscribers. The value is so much greater than the price that most of these newsletter operators are charging.
That's really good to know. As I've been thinking about this myself. And then, what about any bad money you spent or you've seen spent this year?
Not really. I think people blow marketing budgets every day by not having a very good landing page they're sending traffic to. So I just see that happen on every single platform, even in newsletters.
Yeah. And then, right, you're kind of in startup mode a little bit right now. Plus, you got the newsletter. Anything particularly scrappy that you've been doing that you think will pay dividends?
I think the last few weeks I've just been doing things that don't scale. I've just been getting on the phone with people who I would normally charge an hourly rate for to try to get them to sponsor the newsletter or invest in some other projects that I'm working on. So yeah, I think it's just doing things that don't scale as much as everyone says that. And I feel like it's kind of a cop-out answer. Creating content that might not be geared towards virality, but is definitely geared towards and optimized for getting the most amount of inbound DMs to work with me on a particular project. I think it's just doing the things that don't scale. That's what's working best for me right now.
Yeah, it's so much more about the quality of the interaction than the quantity and the vanity metrics right now. So I totally get that. All right, last thing that I like to get people out of here on is, what is one lesson or piece of advice that you think about almost every day?
I have a trading card of Kobe Bryant on my desk that stares at me all day, every day. So just Mamba mentality. There's an amazing documentary of Kobe on Showtime called Muse, M-U-S-E. And at one point he looks into the camera, and almost the whole thing I think is in black and white. So it's very emotional. And I don't know if the word is emotional, but it's very moving and motivating. Mm-hmm. And at one point he looks into the camera and he says, I don't understand why you would ever do anything if you're not trying to be the absolute world number one best at it. Not his words. That's my abbreviation or summary of whatever he said. But I keep that trading card there, that Kobe card of him about to make a dunk wearing his Lakers jersey right next to my laptop on my desk every single day to remind myself that everything I do should be thought of as if I'm doing this to become, the number one marketer, the number one entrepreneur in the world. It's not necessarily my goal. Actually, it's not even close to my goal, but I know that if I approach every decision, every email I write, every tweet I send, every newsletter I send, every decision I make, every hire I make, if I approach all of these things with that level of mentality and that level of thinking, even if I come remotely close to halfway to what Kobe had, I'm going to accomplish my goals. So Mamba mentality for life, even though I'm not a very big Laker fan. I'm actually a Clippers fan.
Oh, wow. But the respect is there. And I think, right, it's the proverbial conscience on your shoulder or someone just kind of holding you accountable. And I think there is something to be said about having a physical representation of that in your environment. So, well, Max, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your thoughts on things. I think people get a lot of value from this.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.